Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Vince, and I've been doing admissions since 1989 and college counseling since 1998 in California.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a graduate of the University of Georgia, and she is getting her master's degree at North Carolina State University. Vince is in the saddle. We'll be looking at an article called "There is Still One Big Trick for Getting into an Elite College," and it's written by a student at Stanford University. It's more of an opinion piece. Vince and I give our take on what we think of the content of that article. Lisa and I will be continuing to look at college-specific questions, and we'll look at a specific question that UT Austin, the University of Texas at Austin, asked this year. We'll have the final part of our interview with Justin Doty and Paul McGinlay, looking at Trinity University, Dean of Admission, and an athletic liaison, and what students need to know about athletic recruiting at a Division III school. And we'll also have the final part of Kevin Newton's breakdown of universities in ancient Scotland. I'm here with Vince from sunny California, man. Any updates, Vince? What's new?
Well, it's crunch time. It's, our tax season. So the big deadline, things are great. We just passed the early decision deadline.
Yep.
And we're headed towards the middle of November, and UCs are due at the end of this month. So we're looking forward to continuing the good work that we're doing with students.
What percentage of people do you think use tutors for personal interest questions for UCs in upwardly mobile communities, private school or affluent suburbs, like essay tutors with those interest questions?
With the PIQs, you mean?
Yeah.
I think a lot of people will get support on those questions because it's a very specific style. They're really looking for content versus, for lack of a better way to describe it, really beautifully written essays that allude to the person. They want concrete facts about what you did and what you're going to bring to the University of California.
Cool. Awesome. Well, I could call that your tip, but you have so much juice there and experience. We're going to have Vince give a tip today, and I get him once a month, and so I know he's got more than 12 tips in that admissions brain, so I try to get an extracted tip out of him. What do you have for us today, Vince?
So I would say it's really important for students to be looking at the interview websites for the colleges that they're applying to. So if your school offers an interview, especially if you can obtain an interview before you apply, you want to go ahead and book that this month, because a lot of people will sort of wake up and realize, oh, I can interview. And schools that offer interviews before you apply have a calendar, and they start to close that calendar on very specific deadlines. So if you have not checked whether or not your school offers interviews and how they offer them, I would suggest that you do that this month for sure.
You know what I've noticed, Vince? More schools are doing interviews.
Yes.
And I'm pretty sure I think I know why. It's because it's more competitive out there. And an interview serves as an opportunity. It's like for a college, especially if they pick good interviewers, it's almost like throwing a log on a fire. Like it can stoke interest. Case in point, I can think of two students I have in mind right now that I'm working with who've had interviews at schools that never used to do interviews, but they do them now. And I'm mentioning these two students because they both will say they're more interested in a school because of the interview. So if you have a good interview that emotionally connects, it's another thing, Lisa always talks about high touch matters. That's such an opportunity for college to be high touch. And especially if you either pick very likable, talented people, or you're doing good matching. I had one tell me, boy, they picked someone that really had my interest and stuff. You can really make a school spike up. And so I have somebody, I've seen that happen this year with Swarthmore, way up. I've seen it happen with McAllister, way up. I've seen it happen with Willamette. And I think it's a kind of a smart move. I think it's a strategy, partly a yield strategy, but even also a way of increasing applications if someone wasn't sure if they wanted to apply. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. It's interesting because I have seen Stanford really pick up the ball and try to interview a lot more students in the past few years. And for those students who are sort of waiting to finish their applications that they're going to submit maybe in January or February, it really behooves you to continue to work on those apps and get them in earlier, because some schools don't grant you access to the interview until after you've applied. So if you want, a fresh interviewer, somebody who hasn't, interviewed 30 people,
sure.
Especially if it is alumni, then I would encourage you to keep working towards that. But I think high touch, good conversations at schools that are almost inaccessible before you apply, with the exception of maybe virtual information sessions and maybe student panels where you might be able to ask one or two questions. I think these opportunities to speak with alumni, to talk with a student in an interview format can really make a difference, because for the first time, the student has access to somebody who went there or somebody who represents the university that can really help them understand why it's a good match.
Yeah, and don't assume, it was just a 21-year-old student. Like, they don't have any influence. They may, they may be very trusted. They might have really won over the respect of the admissions team, and their write-up, could be a factor. We could do a whole hour on interviews, and I'm trying to say every single interview is evaluative. I'm not saying that. I know Cornell has moved away from even doing write-ups. They don't do them anymore. They just have to check a box. Did you show up or not? It's more of a sign of engagement and interest than see what I can learn about the applicant. But you never know, and especially in competitive pools, what it is that tilts the scales. If you're seeing consistent messaging between what the interviewer writes up in the notes, if they're going, I always like to find out, are notes going into the file from this? And if notes are going into the file, even if a school says it's more informative than evaluative, it can always be evaluative. Courtney Minden said that in my interview with her, the VP of Enrollment at Babson. She said the interview is really informative. I said, do notes go in the file? She said, yes. I said to her, so if somebody was an extreme either way, could that influence a decision? She said, yes. I said, I thought you said it was informative. It wasn't evaluative. She had a great answer for me. She said, if somebody walks into our admission office and they're rude to a secretary, that's evaluative. We'll make note of that, but we don't go around saying that every person walking into our admission office is evaluative. And so that was an awesome answer to me. So we were both right? It's an effective evaluative, but and most of the time they help you, don't hurt you. Mm-hmm. You definitely want to come in prepared, relaxed, and do some research on the school.
Yes.
I'm feeling generous today, Vince, so I'm going to throw another tip out, double dose. So a lot of people are still working on their writing. Yeah, we're past the November 1 date, but there's still a lot of dates. January, some schools are rolling well into the spring. Other schools will take applicants into the summer. And so if you're writing, let's just say like a personal statement type essay for like the Common App, I'm trying to get my students to think of it from sort of a three-tiered perspective. First is what I'm going to say authentic? So you got to put it through the authenticometer. I made a word up there, authentic meter, I think sounds better than authenticometer. You got to put it through the authentic meter. Say, is it genuine? Second, is it interesting and unique? admission officers are human, and when they get that 30th essay I've read this month on that same topic, it's just a lot harder for you to stand out. So is it interesting and unique? And then this is, I think, the third one, which is really important, where I think a lot of people miss it, and that is what I'm going to say going to show the value that I will add to that community?
Yes.
Because it's all about that. It's all about, what am I learning about you so I can see what you're going to bring into our community? And I think a lot of people just get so caught up in their stories that they're not thinking, what message am I sending? You know, when I meet with a student and we go over their writing, I always have 3 questions for them. You know, I said, what do you think you did well? They tell me that. I said, what are you not so sure about? Maybe you're not confident about, or you're questioning that maybe you didn't think that you did that well. They give feedback. And then I say, one line, what do you want admission officers to learn about you from what you wrote? And sometimes they freeze on that. And normally, if they freeze, their communication wasn't that clear to begin with in their writing, and they're having a hard time, you know?
Yeah.
And it's that, what's that takeaway? What do you want them to learn? So you got 2 tips today, but hey, there's 2 of us. We've been doing this a while.
Yes. Great tip, though.
Awesome. All right. So our admissions vernacular is the word maxed out. And is that term ever used in your parlance, Vince, in reference to the rigor people took or didn't take? Did you see that in your circles? They maxed out their curriculum?
Yes. And it's a big, especially when students are applying to schools where the admit rate is below 20%, you're really looking at number of classes, you're looking at grade pattern, and then you're looking at rigor.
Yes.
And you can have, I was looking at a school profile recently, a really good public school here in LA, and the biggest number of student seniors, their GPAs were over 4.0. And so it made me wonder, like, what kind of rigor do all those students, I think it was more than 40% of the, it was actually over 50% of the class had over 4.0. So I thought, wow, what kind of rigor do those kids who think they have perfect grades, but they only took 3 classes in senior year and they have no rigor?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it's a big thing to ask yourself. And if applying to schools where the admit rate is low, they're going to zero in on rigor, and they're going to look at that profile and wonder, why is there, over 50% of the students getting over a 4.0?
Yeah, and they're going to expect, and I really like that Vince identified it. It's really mostly that group that admit less than 1 in 5. I'm not trying to say people that admit 33% or 40% aren't looking at rigor, but because they still are too. But when you get into that more selective group, they're not going to be impressed that all your advanced classes are all just in English and history. They're going to want to see that rigor. They're going to identify the 5 solids, sometimes called core classes: math, English, science, social studies, foreign language. And they're going to see, to what extent did you get to advanced levels in those different disciplines. And as you go up the selectivity tier, the most selective schools, they want to see it in all 5 areas. And then those single digit acceptance rate schools. And then, and then for those schools that are taking, a quarter of the applicants, they want to see it in at least 4 of the 5 that you maxed out the curriculum and you got to advanced levels. Now I'm going to ask you a question I've been wanting to ask. I've wanted to bring a guest on to talk about this specifically, and I may still do it, but I want to get your opinion on this, Vince. I think that not every AP, some APs are seen as more like AP light. Within the AP curriculum, what would you say from your experience in admissions were the AP classes that were seen as rigorous?
Definitely AP European history.
So we got one for European history.
I would also say that both Calc AP, AB, and BC are seen as rigorous, as well as both English language exams.
Yeah. And I would say all 3 sciences: physics, chemistry, bio. All three of them. I'd say world as well.
Yeah. Yep.
And look, there may be perfectly good reasons to take them, and I'm not trying to say don't take them, but ones that we're seen on a little bit on the lighter side would be environmental science, human geography. Would you agree with that from your experience?
Yeah, I think anything that is offered freshman year, there might be, a side eye.
and human geography is oftentimes one you'll see offered freshman year.
Yeah, I'm starting to see that in Southern California. And it surprised me because when I saw an AP credit from a sophomore, I thought, oh, what did you take your freshman year? And the school was experiencing so much pressure to offer some rigor earlier that counted because they're trying to maximize UC points, et cetera, et cetera. They started offering AP Human Geography to freshmen.
There you go. Yeah, it's actually really common in Georgia.
Okay.
Very common. Yeah, you'll see it offered in freshman year. Yeah, totally, very, very common. And then you bring a really good point up. This is supposed to be a first-year college class, like a lot of 14-year-olds just out of middle school. Look, I'm not trying to put it down. It can be a great class and a great learning experience. But we're trying to provide a lot of nuance in this podcast and talk about some things that aren't talked about. I don't think a lot of people don't necessarily want to stand up and have this conversation because you're going to depress people that are maybe not taking those courses. But I just think if we're going to have a conversation about rigor, we sort of owe it to the listeners to let them know some of the courses that are really respected. And I agree with you. Anything from AB Calc on up, anything on after that, AB, BC, multivariable, linear, differential, obviously all that stuff is all rigorous.
Yes.
And now it's time for Hot Topics in the News.
All right, so our big number today is 3,000. I'm taking it right from the article, and that Vince and I are going to discuss. It's actually a quote from the Association of Boarding Schools, which is a very reputable organization. I know the leadership there, and they're talking about how boarding school students have done in society and life, and this is what the article says. It says the Association of Boarding School bragged in 2010 that its alumni are 3,000% more likely to become Rhodes Scholars than the average student. So our big number today, 3,000. And that's a good segue into our article. This article Vince sent me. It's actually written, it's an opinion piece by a junior at Stanford named Sophie Callcott. So she's just a junior student who wrote into the New York Times as a guest essay. And the name of the article is There's Still One Big Trick for Getting into an Elite College. And she basically goes on to say she grew up in the Bay Area. She was able to attend a private school. And she says that, this is a strong statement, she says, I'll read it. Competition for coveted spots is so fierce that while admissions victory can't be guaranteed, it can be gamed if you know how to play the game, she claims. And so she goes on to give a lot of stats, like 14% of high schoolers come from private schools at Stanford, and the number at Harvard in a survey in 2019 was as high as 35% coming from private schools. At Stanford, over a quarter of the current population came from private schools, even at 14% of U.S. students attend private schools. And at Harvard, it's more than just a quarter, it's 35%, according to the class survey in 2019. So she uses these stats to indicate that there is a substantial advantage for getting into elite colleges, and that is go to an elite high school. In the article, she goes on to talk about how it's the very purpose of these elite high schools, a lot of times, to get their kids into these schools. Here's a quote from the article. Private high schools openly market themselves on this goal. Many top schools' websites boast about their college matriculation list, showing dozens of alumni at the best universities in the country. And I'm certain that high schools' obsessive focus on academic success derived on some reason the need to tell prospective students they got one more kid into Stanford. And so I actually don't want to spend too much more time talking about the opinion piece. I really want to open up a conversation pretty early about the article and see what your thoughts are, Vince. But I will say one last thing. She talked about the counselor calls. This is when a college counselor at one of the private schools can have a conversation with the admissions professional. And she references 2020, that Swarthmore College ended this practice when it found that 90% of their counselor calls were going to private high schools. And they realized, okay, this is inequitable. How can we continue it? And then they ended up dropping the counselor calls. There's pictures in the article. It shows JFK. You went to Choate Rosemary Hall, a storied school in Wallingford, Connecticut. But Vince, I'd like to know your thoughts on this because, we have very different hosts and we all have different experiences. And I was thinking in preparation for today, a conversation with Julia and Susan, we all might have slightly different views on this. And we don't really discuss our views ahead of time. So it can just be a free-flowing, authentic conversation when we get on here. So tell me what your thoughts are and I'll tell you mine.
So I think this is one of the places where the intersection of college counseling, the process of admissions is viewed by the public in a particular way that, the world is fair. If you do good work, you work hard, then you should be rewarded. But I think that increasingly for these for private schools that are very pricey, you're seeing anywhere prices between $45 and if they're at boarding, probably over $70,000 a year. That these these schools have to make sure that they're competitive, stay competitive in the marketplace, and they can attract students whose families might help their bottom lines. So it's not surprising to me that you're seeing schools really indicate to families how well they do in the admissions process. We have 10 students from this school that go to Stanford, or every year we have 5 students that go to Stanford. So I think that the other part that's sort of hidden from this, if you go to an elite school, you have a stronger opportunity to get into a particular school, is that often the students who are admitted to these private schools or boarding schools have other things that will help them stay competitive in college admissions. So they have special talents. They have played oboe since they were 6, and they have lessons and they went to all the competitions. It could be the same for lacrosse. And I think you did a great job recently when you were talking about Dartmouth, how Dartmouth looked at their sports and realized that less than 1% of American high school students had access to those sports. So why we were giving 25% of our admits to students in those sports. So there's a place where, everyone is trying to stay afloat, trying to keep their schools afloat with people who can pay, development people who can help build their buildings, increase their reputation. So the elite school, going to elite high school, getting into elite college is part and parcel, I think, part of what parents and families need to do in their minds to stay competitive.
Yeah, I think you came down on this very similar probably to where I'm going to come down, which is articles like this, I think, really miss a pretty major point. And Dave and I, maybe 6 or 9 months ago, maybe a year, we talked about one that was even more incendiary. It was in the Atlantic, where they just came out and bludgeoned private schools. And what articles like this miss, in my opinion, is, and you kind of addressed it, Vince, that these schools know in order to continue to get people to pay the tuition dollars, they're going to have a certain kind of college list, because that's partly what people are expecting. I once had a conversation with a very senior level person at Deerfield Academy, which is one of those who's who schools. Go to Deerfield and you'll see the Koch brothers' names written all over there for their multi-million-dollar gifts from some of the richest people in the world. And the conversation went like this: Mark, I don't know what we're going to do. Our college list does not look like it used to 10, 15 years ago. I don't know if people are going to keep paying. It does not look the same. Why is it not looking the same? Because increasingly colleges are prioritizing kids coming from more diverse sets of high schools, whether it's rural schools or homeschooling or charter schools or public magnets. And yeah, there was a time in the day, go back, when these headmasters of these schools had handshake agreements with admission directors at these elite private schools, but that day is over. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so the schools are concerned. They know that, and listen, I worked at one of these schools, and I was part of curating these college lists. And yeah, we were really, really happy anytime Susan and her team got people in those schools because we knew our parents were looking at that. But the one piece I feel that is missing is one of the ways that the schools help proving their value to parents is they recruit people on the front end that the colleges want.
Yes.
They recruit hooked applicants. So sports, for example, so many kids go from these boarding schools and elite private day schools to be recruited athletes. And it was a hook that helped you get in the school on the front end, into the private school, and then it just continues on. In fact, we had a whole arrangement, Vince, with the University of Pennsylvania and a few other places. When they were interested in one of our athletes, and maybe they weren't quite ready for whatever reason, either their athletics were not quite ready to offer them, but they were interested, we would work with them because we were a school that didn't have postgraduate year. Okay. But we would work and find a lot of boarding schools do have a postgraduate year. It's a year after 12th grade where you go strengthen your athletic skills, take some more advanced classes. We would work with them to find a school where the student athlete could go in for a year and then they'd go to the Penn or Brown or whatever. So schools are doing that on the front end. Plus, another way to get into these schools is to give a really, really large gift. And for some of the more exclusive ones, it needs to be 8 figures these days. Well, guess what? You find more families like that at those places that can give that kind of donation. So, and you mentioned another one, music. So, and then underrepresented students of color. So yes. These schools are going around, they have partnerships. I know because I played that role, I was involved in multicultural recruitment. And they're identifying the most gifted and talented underrepresented students of color at an early age. There's programs out there that identify them, like the Prep for Preps and others. I could list 20 of those programs. They're identifying the 6th and 7th grade, grooming them for a couple years so that they can get into one of these schools. Then the school grooms them for 4 years. And then the elite schools like, look, you got a student of color and an underrepresented student of color that's been exposed to this amazing curriculum that can write well, that can speak well, that's titled, that is excelling in this environment and these recommendations are glowing. I once had a school say to me, it was an elite school, elite college. They said, we could go into Harlem. We could go into the Bronx. We could get their valedictorian. But we don't know if they can live in a predominantly white community. We don't know if they can live in a predominantly white wealthy community. We don't know if they can live away from home. We don't necessarily trust the curriculum at their school. We trust yours. We don't get much for the recommendations, but with yours, you guys are so descriptive. We know exactly what you're getting because you know your teachers, your counselors know the kids so well. So your kids aren't risky.
Right.
So the point is, you can't just look at the numbers because the schools are cherry picking, not just for hooked applicants, but overall. I had a kid, very strong kid I worked with, that didn't get, I do boarding school placement too. So like 100 kids to all these schools from Atlanta and all over the country. I had a kid who was valedictorian of her middle school. She was full pay, great kid. Teachers loved her. She was involved in lots of activities. Who didn't get in Phillips Exeter or Milton Academy. So that's another thing. You got a kid who may end up going to an Ivy League or probably will end up at either an Ivy League school or an Ivy peer.
Yeah.
But she couldn't even get into one of these schools. So so of course, if you're that selective on the front end, even without hooks, your academic pool is gonna be that much stronger, right?
Yeah.
So yes. I think that's the piece that's missed. Now, are there advantages? Yes, there's advantages, but I would argue, Vince, that the advantage is with the tier down, not the Stanfords. Once you go down to a slightly less selective tier, there's a group of private schools that are just really happy to get full pay families that can do the work. Those schools will scurry to get to these places because they're full of full pay families that are going to go to college. And there, your ability to pay becomes an advantage. And the fact that you've been exposed to a good curriculum, and you've been away from home if it's a boarding school. But those are schools, I hate to name names, but I'm going to name one. A school like Trinity College in Hartfield, Connecticut, a school like that, they love kids like this because they can pay. So I would admit, and then there are advantages because the way the recommendations are written, they know the kids so well, and you're getting a full picture. And the counselors usually came from college admissions, and they know how the system works, and they can give some good guidance. And sometimes the whole essay writing, all that system is set up. They might have classes on college prep. But this is the other side that's not being told. You are judged also in the context for which you come. So when you put yourself into the super competitive pool, the schools like the Emorys, they don't want to see you coming out with straight B's.
Right. No,
and you might have been able to get A's at another school. And so because what I find the most entitlement and the most disillusionment I see from any students I work with are people that go to these schools because they think I've paid my $40,000, I paid my $60,000. Now it's time for the payoff with college. And then they turn around and they're like, I could have had these same options if I went to my local public school and just worked with an independent counselor, and they're very disillusioned. Right. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I would say, I've heard, families say, at my school, we own 5 spots. When I heard the word own, I thought, wow, that's curious language that we're using here. And it goes back to those particular parents had an experience where they were clearly knowledgeable about what moved the dial during their experience. But I will say that landscape is changing. Penn said, thank you for graduating. Thank you for supporting us, but we're not giving you a push in the admissions process. So things are changing. So even the parents, I think, of students who are trying to provide the best means and opportunities can get flumfluxed with, oh, I thought we were doing everything correct or right. And when they realize that some schools, the expectation for a student coming from Harvard Westlake may be different from what it would be if they went to Belmont High School in downtown LA, everyone would agree that there should be a difference of opinion about what students are able to do. But there's just, it's a double-edged sword. And I think that's where parents are struggling to understand that there's a changed landscape, and it will continue to evolve to try to provide as much access as possible where the access is really vital. I think as the Supreme Court looks at race and admissions, there'll be a big discussion next June about where we've come and where we have not gotten to yet and what we still need to do. And I think that this is one question, but clearly alumni status, ability to pay for access to great opportunities will continue to be a discussion because those things aren't going to be changed by a law, particularly.
Yeah, and it maybe at some point early decision may be challenged. We'll see, but people with resources will always find a way to work around the system. Yeah. And this is not just these schools. A lot of the same things we're saying here also do apply to your affluent, highly rated public schools. It's because if you have parents of means, then they can pay to cultivate your hook, whether it's lacrosse or whether it's crew or whether it's the oboe, or many other things that you do. It's your unique overseas experiences you had that makes it look like you've got this global experience because of all the places that you've lived or traveled. Like, that stuff can be seen as rich. You're bringing a rich cultural perspective to the table. And if anyone ever thinks we're going to ever perfectly get a level playing field, we're just not. But I really do think that overall, I think that this article misses the point. It misses the point. It overestimates the advantage that these schools have, is what I would say.
Yes.
You agree?
Yes.
You agree, Vince? We both
Yes.
agree. Yeah.
Yes. I think it's an important thing to raise the issue, and I'm glad that she understands what the advantages were, but she also doesn't recognize what the advantages are of being in that kind of environment, and how that environment is cultivated just like college within an inch of its life.
One thing I'll give her credit for, I remember when, showing my age here, but, what was the name? Ann Richards, first female governor of Texas, when she was debating George Bush, probably way back a long time ago in the 80s. And then she said, poor George, he was born on third base and thinks he hit a triple, and that's true of so many people. Yeah. They don't, and all of us have to ask ourselves, like, to what degree do I have the opportunities that I have because of my class advantage? And so what I appreciate about her is she's not in denial of her own class advantage, and she's acknowledging that, and she's in tune with it. And she's basically saying, I don't think I would have this opportunity if I'd not been able to go to the school that I went to. And so I appreciate that, because I think more people need to understand that they're not just self-made men and self-made women. They got a lot of the opportunities they got because of their parents and because of the educational environment their parents were able to put them in. And that can go all the way back to age 2 or 3, right, with the preschools that you started with. You know, and all of the enrichment and all the camps that you did through the summer and through the school year. And so I like to see people that are in touch with their own class advantage. And so I really give her a lot of credit for that. But I just think there's another side of it, which is it's not really apples and oranges when the schools are on the front end recruiting kids that they know that the colleges want. And they know they need to do it, and they do it.
Yes, absolutely.
So good, robust discussion, Vince. Got a final word for us?
Thank you.
Hey, thank you too.
Thank you for your for what you're doing out there, and for keeping us IECs informed with such good information. So that's my over and out.
Over and out. Well, thank you for being a part of our team, my friend. I look forward to our conversations every month, and in between the month when we talk as well.
All right.
See you next month.
Take care.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
All right, Lisa, picking up like we did last week, we're going to take a look at a different question, which is a little not as morbid this time. So take it away.
This next question comes to us from UT Austin, and it states, describe how your experiences, perspectives, talents, and or your involvement in leadership activities at your school, job, community, or within your family will help you to make an impact both in and out of the classroom while enrolled at UT.
All right. And for those of you not knowing the UT, that's just University of Texas. So University of Texas at Austin, there's lots of campuses. You know, Dallas, Arlington, others. This is the flagship campus for the state of Texas. And this is an important question on a lot of levels. You know, at least you've heard me say it over and over again. I can summarize everything colleges are looking for in 2 words: positive impact. You know, recently I heard somebody say, it was a leading college, like, I can summarize summarize what we're looking for in 3 words. And I was like, what are they going to say? And then they said, significant positive impact.
Oh, there you go.
They upped me.
One-upped you.
They upped me. Significant positive. But the point is, this is what colleges are looking for, and this is the question to suss that out. I want to get a sense of what your impact will be on our campus, so articulate for me what you feel your impact will be on this. And the interesting thing about this is they give so many categories. So if I was approaching this question, I literally would start with a pen and paper or whatever, if you type, however, some way of writing things down, because there's a lot here. So it says, describe your experiences. So you could brainstorm, what are all your experiences, related to impact. Then you could write the next thing, your perspectives. What perspectives do you have related to impact? What talents do you have? And then, and then your own involvement in leadership activities. So then you can brainstorm all of those. And then it says it could be at your school. That's a whole series. In your job, that could be different ones. In your community, or even within your family. So you should have a whole range of things to work with here. And then it says, will help you, this is key, to make an impact. Obviously, they're talking about significant positive. And then it says, in and out of the classroom while enrolled. So this is the classic case of, we're looking for difference makers. And we're giving you an opportunity to tell us, how will you be a change agent? How will you make our, one of the questions I like to ask students when I'm doing interview prep is, how will our school be stronger if you come?
Right.
Just to see how they answer that. And that's basically what they're asking in this question. And, there are certain parts of a college application where students should not be ashamed to boldly say what they do and do well. And that can be really hard for people because we're kind of really trained to be modest all the time. One of the parts is the activity section. Like, that's your place to brag. That's your place. Not to embellish, but to brag. Now, normally your personal statement is not the place to brag. But this is a college-specific question that is set right up. Now, of course, when I say brag, listen, you don't write, I'm the greatest thing since sliced bread. Like I'm not talking about that.
I kind of would like to see an essay about how you're better than sliced bread. I'd like to see you make that argument, but that probably won't get you into UT Austin.
No. So I have to, qualify what I mean by brag. But this is your opportunity to say where you've had impact and where you expect your impact will be on the college campus. And I mean, that is a huge part. I can't emphasize it enough that you're in class 15 hours a week if you're taking a full-time load out of 168. That's a lot of hours you're not in class. 153, even if you sleep 7 hours a night. 49, that leaves 104 hours when you're not asleep and you're not in class. So what are you doing to make our community stronger? And this is one of these questions where sometimes people can approach them very sheepishly because we've just been trained and oriented, socialized that it's not polite in polite society to kind of say what you do well. Sometimes, when I'm working with a student, I'm trying to get them to really bring out what they do well, and they're afraid of appearing to be like full of themselves. There's ways to do it. You can kind of quote someone else. You can say, I've consistently been told that when I sing, people are moved. And so I've come to realize that that's a gift that I have.
Mm-hmm.
And as opposed to saying, in my opinion, nobody sings better than me. So there can be a little bit of diplomacy still, but this is your opportunity to talk about where you've had impact. And they give you a lot of options. You can talk experiences, perspectives, talents, involvement in leadership, school, job, community. Schools are looking for leaders. Not everybody has to be, but this is another question to suss out your leadership your leadership. And a lot of times people need to realize you can be a leader without having the title.
Right.
So, any other thing you want to say on this one, Lisa?
Well, I always kind of approach these essays. So on the one hand, you want to talk about like, all the different ways in which you have had accomplishments or you have talents, but you also want to show why those are a good fit for what they have to offer at that school. So I think, I have kids combine that with some research about what is going on at that school and what they think that they could make an impact in, specifically given their talents and interests. So to kind of say like, I'm like great and I'm a great fit for you.
I'm really, really, really glad that you brought that up, because I would want a student to answer this question differently if it said while enrolled in college. That while enrolled at UT is very important.
Right.
Because anytime you see that, now it needs some customization. So now part of that can be doing a lot of research, going back, looking at newspapers and articles and scouring the website, looking at the social media, looking at, all those things to find out what's going on in the school, so that you can take your gifts, passions, experiences, and apply them in a custom way. That is an answer that is going to resonate a lot more. Like, let's say you had been involved in, I'm sure there's a student group out there, Students Against Drunk Driving. I know there's like Mad Mothers Against, but let's say, I'm just making this up, but let's say you've been involved in that and volunteerism. And then you did some research and found out that there had been a problem on campus in that area. Then you could talk about, where there's been some challenges there, something I've been involved in, and talk about your leadership. And that's something that I feel like could contribute to the UT camp. That's a more powerful answer.
Right.
All of these college-specific essays are partly designed to see if you've done your research on the school. They're all partly designed to see how well do you know us, how much research have you put in, and they're also designed to learn something new about you that you have not communicated anywhere else in the application. That's true for the personal statement, the college-specific. I mean, the whole entire application, everything, whether it's a resume that you're doing, your activities section, everything should be providing new information that they don't know about you that you haven't already said somewhere else.
Right.
And so this is an opportunity to combine, like so many of the college-specific questions are, new knowledge about yourself with show me that you understand who we are, you get who we are, and you show me that you're a match for who we are. In this sense, it's in the context of where will you make a difference? Where can your leadership, how can you apply your leadership skills? But that's an extremely important point that you brought up. If this is because of the at UT, this is not an answer that you can just completely just repurpose for another school.
No.
There's got to be some UT customization. Whereas if they asked the exact same question and they just said in college, then this could potentially be one that you could repurpose for another school because there'd be no UT specific component. And there are questions out there that are like that don't mention the school at all, and you can repurpose them. You just have to maybe adjust your word count.
Right. And I forgot to mention that this question is requiring 250 to 300 words just for scope. And again, like there's so many different ways you could talk about yourself in this essay, even things like, let's say that you have babysat your little brother for, after school and what you've learned with that, and the maturity that you've gotten to that and being responsible for other people. And that has kind of made you interested in working with young people and you want to volunteer in the such and such club and do this other thing. I mean, it doesn't have to be that like you're the most highly like explicitly accomplished student around, but everyone has something they can talk about, I think, that is impressive within them. And just to try to pull that out and tie it to what you do at that school.
Yeah, when I'm working with a student on these, at least I read the question 5 times. And even if it's a question I've read a zillion times before, I just read it 5 times just because I want to be so attuned to every single word. And I think one of the words that jumps off the page to me in this question is the word family.
Right.
It relates to your babysitting point. When it says describe experiences, perspectives, talents, involvement in leadership, school, job, community, family. I mean, even the word community is very broad. Community could be your Girl Scouts. Community could be your chess club.
Right.
Like there's a lot of different things that word community could refer to.
Right.
So they've really made it incredibly broad. This is a question that I really would tell any student to do a lot of brainstorming first.
Right. Really think about it and try to be creative. Like you could talk about like even a community could be a virtual community, so there are a lot of like gamers who work together to, program things or create different things. That's way more complicated and I don't really know, but they do stuff and involve leadership and cooperation. And I think that's a valuable life skill. So things like that, it can be anything.
The other thing I would point to in this question is the same thing we talked about last week when we said don't miss the double question within the question. Here, the double question is both in and outside the classroom.
Right.
So when you're making your application here, I expect a student to have an in the classroom application and an outside the classroom.
Exactly.
Because that's what it's asking. And that's the kind of thing that people can easily miss. That's why I read a question 5 times. Because you can easily just miss that and easily just maybe you come and you talk about the fact that I've been, really involved in cancer research and, you know what I mean? And I plan on getting involved. Even if you look up and find some club or activity that they do relate to cancer research, or you say you don't have anything like that, I'd be interested in starting that.
Right.
Okay, that's an outside the classroom thing. So you've answered the outside the classroom, but now let's talk about the perspectives that you're going to bring to the classroom. And I would venture to bet a high percentage of people that answer this do not have an in the classroom and an outside the classroom application to this.
Right. Yeah. And that's why you make this great point that you have to really read the question and answer the question, all of the parts. Because, that could be like your major or you want to take a class with a specific professor. I have a student who's really interested in ceramics. So he might say he wants to study with so-and-so because he likes their pottery work and, he wants to volunteer in an art studio for kids. You can combine all the stuff, but definitely, naming something by name that you want to do academically at that school and having it be cohesive within that essay to the other things that you're talking about.
This, Lisa, I work with a lot of really, really smart kids. This is just me surmising here, just completely not statistical analysis, but I bet 40% of the time when I'm giving feedback to a student on a college-specific question, I find a component of the question that they missed in their answer.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? Like I go back and I say, did you see how it said, whatever, like you pointed out, enrolled at UT? There's nothing in here you said at all related to to UT or like we've pointed out, in the classroom, out of the classroom. That stuff routinely gets missed.
Right.
Routinely. And it's just simply because people look at it quickly, think they understand it, and they go on and they miss a component. I was listening to a conversation with an admission officer from Dartmouth. He was doing a presentation at a huge fair that we have in Atlanta in a breakout session, and I was proctoring the breakout session. And he said, we don't spend a second talking about whether someone got 32 or 33 on the ACT. He said, but we will be going back for, and forth for minute after minute after minute over their answer to a college-specific question.
Right.
And he said, because we, over the summer, our director, basically, we get to propose a bunch of different questions that we think would be great. And we start out with a big number, and then we lock ourselves in a room and for hours and whittle down at the end and come away with which questions that we're going to ask. And every word is carefully chosen. It's almost like mission statements. When schools do mission statements, I've been a part of a few organizations before where, meeting after meeting after meeting going over like this word and that word in the mission statement. That's because it's really important. And that's the kind of care, like there's nothing that just happens to seep into one of these questions that wasn't incredibly intentionally chosen.
Right, of course.
And that's true of all of these. So I can't emphasize how important it is to read a question, read it over and over and over, and look for the question within the question. In this case, UT. In this case, in the classroom, out the classroom. And then there's a long list of things that you could, could apply it to. And so kind of using this question as a little bit of a springboard that people can apply to just how to read one of these in general, not just only look at this.
Right. Yeah. And I think that, this is one of the things I think most kids and their parents don't know this, that you have to, really read the question and answer it with specific information that shows that you've done research about that school and also shows that you're a good fit for them. That is not something that is intuitive. And that's where I kind of feel like kids who get really good advice have a leg up in these, in their essays. Where kids who don't have that advice, they're just kind of, they don't realize it's like a trick question and they don't know the trick. And so I feel kind of bad about that. But, if you're listening, now you know.
My sentiments exactly, Lisa, because, when I've had a chance to sit in file reading process with schools, I've been very outspoken about this because almost every time when you do that, you'll see how kids just get dinged for not answering these questions well. And then after we get a chance to chit chat afterwards, I always say to them the same thing. I always say, most of the wicked smart kids I work with, they do not do a good job on these the first time. This is just purely a coaching question. Once somebody knows how to answer it, then they produce. I'm not telling you not to put a big emphasis on it, but it's just something that, boy, you want to talk about one of the areas that shows the difference between being well-resourced and under-resourced comes to answering these questions.
This is like the hugest one, I think. Yeah, absolutely. Because if you're, parents haven't applied to college and you don't have a guidance counselor at your school who maybe even has answered these questions in their own academic career, there's nobody to help you. And there are books and there are resources, but most kids don't know to seek that out. And I kind of wonder sometimes about the ethics of including these kinds of questions when they want something very specific, but they're not being, it's like it's hidden within the question and they're not being clear about what it is. And people who have the secret handshake can write what they want and people who don't get in. I don't know. That's just me.
Yeah, I can understand that. But on the other hand, boy, they can really tell you a lot. They really can reveal a lot. They can. I get that coaching gives a person a huge advantage and I really conflicted on that. But you can really learn a lot from these. And there is such a tendency for people to think that the main 650-word personal statement is the important one. And that's the one that they may even work on in class, or that's the one where they seek outside help. And then the shorties just get brushed over. Mm-hmm. And I would actually argue that these count even more.
Well, right, because it's something the school specifically wants to know about. They've taken the time to put it in there. They know that if they put these essays in the Common App, they're going to lose applicants for people who just don't want to write it. They take a hit on the number of applicants they have for that. So they obviously really want that information. I just wish maybe the schools, in either how they write the questions or in how they, have information on their websites for admissions, would be a little more explicit about what they're looking for.
Yeah, there's things that could be done. That could be one. And some schools do a better job than others of this, and taking into consideration, like, if I'm in admissions, I'm just going to be honest. If I'm reading a college-specific question from someone coming from where I worked at, Westtown School, or where Julia works at, Milton Academy, I have a whole different level of expectation than if it's even a big suburban public school. Right, let alone a rural school or an inner city school. I just do, because I know the type of counseling and coaching you're getting there in that environment. Now, you don't always know individually, like, is somebody working with somebody independently who's great? Like, you can't know all that. But I've said this before, but I'm going to say it again because it's really important. And I know that not everybody hears every episode or remembers what they hear. But think about all of the components of the application. Think about all of them. All the other components of the application, the individual college had no choice at all over it. They didn't get to pick what school you went to. They didn't get to pick what courses that you took. They didn't get to pick whether you did an ACT or whether you did an SAT or whether you're test optional or whether you took AP exams or whether you didn't or whether you report your AP scores or or who you ask to do your teacher recommendations, or what you do in the summer, or what activities you participated in, or what order you listed your activity. Just listed 12 to 15 things there. They didn't get to pick any of that stuff.
Right.
Like the only thing that they get to pick are these questions. And this is the one time in your application that you're speaking directly to them. They're definitely looking to ascertain whether or not you understand their institution and whether or not you are a fit and a match for their institution.
Right.
And the other thing about these questions is because they're reading the same one over and over and over again, humans are doing this, not robots. It's just human nature. It's just very easy to get bored. I remember the last time I sat in a live admission reading process with a school, I think the last time was Emory. I've done it with Haverford and Emory. We're back to back. I can't remember which one was the most recent, but it was Emory. And I can distinctly remember one of the admission readers saying, I've read that answer 8 times already this week.
Right.
Read that 8 times already this week. So it's just very easy to bore somebody when they have to read the same question over and over again. Like even the personal statement gives you a tremendous amount of variety of where you want to go with that. But these questions, reading them over and over and over again. So that's another thing that raises the bar, because it's human nature that if I'm seeing the same thing over and over again, my mind goes on cruise control, there you go. So that's also a little bit of a challenge to sometimes have a little bit of creativity can be good too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. These are definitely not the kind of things that you want to procrastinate on and leave till the last minute.
And that often is done.
Oh, so often, despite, all the nagging I do to the contrary. I mean, because you really need some time to think about it, to be creative, to do your research. It's 250 words. The kid says, oh, yeah, I can write that. Well, yeah, you can write 250 words, but what 250 effective words? That's a different story.
Yeah. Well, let's lend it with that, Lisa. I think we've covered this pretty well. But it was a good, robust conversation the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, no, I think it'll be really helpful. And I hope that, people will kind of now understand how to approach a little bit more successfully.
Yeah, and let's come back to them again. I mean, one thing I'm trying to get better at the podcast is timing things a little bit better to the academic calendar. These are going live in November. Ideally, I kind of would have loved to have done this in September, at least early October. So if you can remind me, I know there's lots and lots of applications that aren't due until January. So a lot of people will still be able to apply this. But I'd like next year around September and October, let's take on a bunch of the other common ones, because there's a lot of other really common ones. For one, we've never really done a deep dive on the why us, why this school, the why essay. We really need to tackle that for our listeners, because that's probably the most commonly asked college-specific question.
Yeah, I definitely think so, And
then we can just do some categorization. There's a lot out there about talk to me about an extracurricular, blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? That's another way of sussing out impact. But there's a lot of really, there's about 12, maybe 15 common ones that you see repeated a lot as far as themes. Maybe by next year we can kind of come up with that list. And I don't know if we'll go through all of them, but maybe we'll do a couple a year and just keep chugging away. But thanks, Lisa.
Oh,
good
my
conversation.
pleasure.
As always. See you next week.
See you next week.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, we are at the final part of my interview with Justin Doty and Paul McGinlay, two Trinity University employees. Justin being the director of admission over 20 years there. Paul, athletic liaison over 30 years there. And today we're going to talk about early decision and how it works in the college admission process. And then we'll put them on the hot seat. Listen and enjoy. One thing I'm really happy about this interview, not only for the athletes that are listening, but I've been trying to get people to understand that if you see a school that brings in 2,000 kids, that doesn't mean there's 2,000 spots for your kid, right? Because you're right, because schools are
Right.
trying to be as close they can. This just gender alone, and then you're trying to get as many states and as many countries, and then some schools are looking at majors and programs and racial and ethnic diversity, and then athletes and artists, and then you boil it all down, and there's not as many spots as you think for your kid.
Mm.
And so I think that this is helpful even for the non-athlete to kind of understand sort of how the sausage is made.
Sure,
You know?
sure.
Yeah.
And again, the earlier everyone gets started on that, the better. I'd like to have my entire class done early decision by Christmas. Has not happened in 32 years. Not anticipating it's going to happen this year, but we are starting to populate our rosters with a few more each year at early decision.
Yeah, no, that was a question I wanted to ask. So, one school I can think of, they'll do a 1 to 5 read on probability of a kid, and they'll have a different number early decision versus regular. So 5 is pretty much a sure thing, and then 4 is a probable, and 3 could go either way. But I've had kids say, look, you're a 5 early decision, regular, you're a blah, blah, and so obviously every coach would want early decision, right? Because you need to have a roster and you don't want that unpredictability.
Right.
But you're not the only school out there, and you're competing with, with
Sure,
other
right.
schools. And so how does early decision play into your pre-read process?
Yeah, I think for us, and granted, there's so much, I'm thinking about institutions across the country and the percentage that they fill early decision versus regular. And of course, we're also an early action institution. So that tends to change the game a little bit. In an ideal world, it's the coach offering a roster spot and trying to seek a commitment from the recruit. And then for us too, it's like, oh my gosh, this would be great if this could all work out, or either ED1 or ED2, either way. And I think that's the ultimate goal, to see if we can make that happen, if that makes sense for that particular student. But it certainly doesn't happen all the time, obviously. So,
do you find, Paul, on your side, that when you're talking with a recruit as a coach, that you kind of are steering them toward ED, or saying there could be a spot for you if you're interested in ED? Are there any of those kinds of conversations happening?
Oh, for sure, Mark. And we have August is always first week in August is always our ID camp for the next class. And we've been very successful in identifying student athletes at that early August camp that end up going through the ED process and depositing by January 1. So that is an ideal situation, but it's not the norm. It's not the normal situation. So, for instance, last year that happened with two student athletes. Saw them at the ID camp, fit the academic profile, did the pre-read, put the package together, and they deposited by January 1.
Awesome. This has been absolutely fantastic. Is there anything you haven't shared at all that you'd like to share, either about athletics or about Trinity?
I was going to jump in with one thing. Mark, we were talking about the continuity of the coaching staff at Trinity, longevity and talent and experience. I wanted to give a shout out to our athletic director, Bob King. I mean, this is, I think, year 30 for Bob, and
wow,
he's a three-time national AD of the year. And
oh my goodness,
just an incredible leader. So as we talk about the coaching staff and the structure and everything like that, I think about him and his leadership. And then it's been interesting too, Mark, in the last couple of years, we've actually structurally changed where athletics is now reporting to and housed under enrollment management. And so, admissions obviously fell there, but now it's like we're all working together, and now we are in a formal capacity, so reporting to our vice president of enrollment management. So I think that's been exciting too, to just see that portfolio grow and in more of a formal way. But it's kind of unorthodox, to see athletics underneath enrollment management. But I think for us, it's really made sense.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean 22 to 25% of your students, like that's an
Right.
important enrollment management factor. Sound
Yeah.
like Paul, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, we just have such a strong history of athletic performance dating back to the 60s and 70s with men's and women's tennis. I mean, we have Olympians, we have Wimbledon champions that are previous
Wow.
Trinity grads. So the history of men's and women's tennis has been just phenomenal, and that has transitioned into Division III also, where we find ourselves usually in the final eight of the tennis championships. But we have 18 sports. They're all successful in their own right. Some of them uber successful over a couple of decades, and that history and tradition trickles down to to this incoming class that's coming in right now, where we're all looking at each other and feeling quite happy that we once again may end up in the top 20 of Division III athletics, with all our sports having to count. Because the way that the Sears Trophy, the Directors' Cup works is you have 18 of your best sports. Well, we only have 18 sports, so they all have to count. So some other institutions in the Northeast maybe have 20, 25, 30 sports, and they can offer up their best 18 sports. But so we're in a great situation there. Bob King has been here 30 years. He's been my direct boss for every one of those days. And as Justin said, this kind of continuity is unusual. To manage Fantasy Island, as some of the faculty like to call up the athletic department, it is a massive task. And he's had the temperament and the personality and the professionalism across 3 decades he's watched us all grow. And with his leadership, we've found ourselves in 2022 in a great spot. Back to resources, as we came across campus, this from Justin's office to this location, the track is being resurfaced. Baseball is being renovated with a new turf field. Softball is having a new facility created for them. So we're not deferring any maintenance. Our soccer facility was improved 4 or 5 years ago. So we are spending money on our athletic environment and not just hoarding it in the endowment bank. So we feel fortunate as you compare ourselves with other institutions that we're going into this year with in another great spot.
Yeah.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
Friends, you may remember when I recommended Ron Lieber's book, The Price You Pay for College. I recommended it because of its user-friendly delivery, and it puts the cookies on the lower shelf. But I said it's not the most comprehensive book when it comes to paying for college out there. And that is the book, Paying for College, 2022. Everything you need to maximize financial aid and afford college. And it's our recommended resource for episode 273. The thing about Paying for College, and this is done by Calman Chaney, is it's a reworked title. So it used to be called Paying for College Without Going Broke. And it was produced every single year by Princeton Review. So they've just changed the name from Paying for College Without Going Broke to Paying for College. And it really helps you know how to maximize your need-based aid, your merit-based aid. And if you don't mind getting into the weeds and having something that can get a little technical at times, then this is a really good book. And quite honestly, if you're a college counselor, this is a must. And most college counselors, their biggest weakness is the money piece. So this is I cannot recommend it enough for college counselors. And if you're a parent, you really want to get a masterful understanding of the money piece, everything from need-based financial aid to merit-based money to how things like the profile and FAFSA and aid appeals and all of that and many, many other topics work. This is the book, Paying for College, 2022, everything you need to maximize financial aid and afford college. Now, the 2023 version is supposed to be out any minute now. You might want to wait on that. But once again, it's Paying for College 2022 or 2023. Now return to my interview with Justin Doty, Paul McGinlay. Well, this has been awesome. And as you know, no first-time guest comes on your College Bound Kid without going on the hot seat. We call it the lightning round. And I never told you any of these questions, so this is where you have to trust me. You ready? Fasten up the seatbelt. All right, I'll ask you both this question. What's one thing on your bucket list? Something you want to do before you move on from this earth?
Oh, man. Paul has an answer. I want to be a head men's soccer coach someday.
You're coming for his job. But guess what? He's up to year 32 and he's not going anywhere. Exactly. So you'd have to leave Trinity to do that.
Yeah, no, that's not happened. Boy, bucket list, I would say travel more. I just spent this summer in basically crossing Europe in the month of June for various different reasons. And it just gave me the bug that I got to get out of the zip code more often. So, jumping on a plane and traveling around the world. We've had great fortune with our Trinity soccer team to be able to incorporate international travel into what we do. And we spent far too many spring breaks on Copacabana in Rio de Janeiro and hope to do that again in 2023, after this pandemic's in the rearview mirror. But travel would be the answer there, Mark.
Any country or state anywhere that you want to get to that you haven't been to?
Europe is so large. London's obviously my destination point, having grown up there. But I would want to investigate too much in Europe. I mean, Portugal, Spain. I was in Mallorca this summer, and I'd like to go back there. But there's other places that I'd like to go also. So travel is on the bucket list.
What about you, Justin? I see you pass that one off to Paul.
I know. So, and I honestly, for your listeners, I keep thinking something more interesting that they would want to hear. What's going through my head, though, is what I'm obsessed with is offshore fishing.
Oh, cool.
So, I mean, like my dream is to land an enormous blue marlin,
Whoa.
I don't know. That's what I grew up on the coast. That's my happy place is being on the water. And it may happen. I don't want to jinx myself, but we're going to Hawaii next week.
Nice.
We're doing a big deep sea expedition. So I might
get that blue marlin.
I might check that off the list.
Regular Ernest Hemingway.
There you go. All right. If you had to have lunch with any person, alive or dead, who would you pick?
Oh, wow.
Told you this is harder than the interview.
Yeah, I made the mistake a couple of years ago of asking my mom about her dad. She lost her father when she was 16, and she went into a long letter that sits in my top drawer. And the last line of it was, "You had to ask." And it would be, she lost her dad at 16, and she said, "Not only did I lose my dad, I lost my best friend." So that would be on my high on my list.
Personal one. Mm-hmm. What about somebody famous for you or somebody
famous for me? Yeah. We have kind of an interesting little Doty story, with my grandfather he was somewhat colleagues with Dr. Martin Luther King, and just the story of him taking Dr. King, picking him up at the airport, taking him to a speech that he was making at DePauw University in Indiana, and just that car ride. And my dad was there, and his sister and his brother. They have these amazing pictures from that, and they remember those conversations. And anyway, we talk about that, and he was the first one that popped into my head. That'd be amazing to talk to him and pick his brain. So,
yeah, I'm sure he'd have a story or two.
Yeah.
Professionally for me, Mark, it would be Andreas Iniesta, a soccer player from Barcelona in Spain.
Why am I not surprised? Mr. Soccer went soccer on me.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe other people would pick other players, but for me, he was just a consummate professional and just a magician with the ball, with and without the ball. So I'd love to sit down and pick his brain.
Yeah. Love it, love it, love it. What's one pet peeve that you have?
Oh, pet peeve.
I can help narrow it in. What about a driving pet peeve? Something that bothers you that a driver does when you're on the road? Boy, you're easy to please, Justin.
I know, seriously.
I mean, I'd probably have to go with being on the phone, like visibly being on the phone, having the phone, just because I've got a young daughter who's a junior in college and driving, and I never think it's going to be her problem. I always think it's going to be someone else. So just any opportunity to have to distracted driving would be a big pet peeve.
There you go.
The one that's people that know me well would laugh at this. I tend to be an active listener. I do a lot of head nodding and,
Sure.
affirming and all of that. But, when I'm talking to someone and it's all about them, for the entirety of the conversation, and it's just the self-absorption kind of thing. And sometimes I have found myself in those situations where I'm like, okay, now that I'm active listening, I'm in this. What's my escape route?
So someone who's consumed with themselves, so your active listening ship is just sucking all the energy out of you.
Right, exactly.
That makes sense. What's a book you've read that has had a profound impact on you?
Oh, man.
Told you this was hard.
You're the English major.
Yeah, the English major here. I've got to try and cut it down. Wow. I should be coming up with an English book here, but it's actually going to be an American. The Great Gatsby, I remember in college just being profoundly moved by that. And I think F. Scott Fitzgerald came out with the line, Gatsby had a heightened sensitivity to the promises of life. And I'm thinking that I don't remember those words ever being joined in literature that had any more meaning. So I like to try and hang out with those people that have a heightened sensitivity to the promises of life.
I like it.
And probably one of the reasons I haven't left this place, there's a lot of people that fit that mold here at Trinity.
Yeah.
I totally should have gone first.
Why? Did he take your book?
No, it sounds so.
Oh, he went so deep. He went so deep.
Yeah, philosophical. I mean,
you're going to tell me a comic book for something.
I know, exactly. Mine involves pictures, right? Cartoons. Mine is just nerdy. I mean, I just, finally read Breakpoint. I don't know if you've read that, but higher ed. And, I just feel like if I have a chance to read, I probably should have picked something that's just outside of my job. But I ended up
No, that's okay.
That and it just was so interesting, fascinating perspective about kind of where we're headed.
What were your takeaways from Breakpoint?
Just, I really kind of thinking about this notion of, the increased cost, right? And kind of where we are as consumers and the economy and just what's happening with these pressure points. And I've often thought about that higher ed bubble, and what's on the horizon. So with demographics, I mean, there's all these things at play. So it's fascinating to think about what may be happening in the next decade or two within at least this profession. So.
And my last question is best advice to parents, students, college counselors.
Be transparent, be honest, be open, come kick the tires if you're interested. And it's an important journey. And I always look at it as a lifetime journey for the parents and the student athletes that attend, that this relationship is about to start. And it's not going to end. It's going to continue. So all the qualities that you would expect to have in any kind of relationship, trust, openness, honesty, transparency. I think if you possess those qualities, I don't think the relationship can go sour.
Good stuff.
I always think about a student that I worked with that I thought it was the most refreshing thing because when we talk to high school juniors and seniors, it's stressful. It's overwhelming. There's so many things to navigate. And when I spoke with her, she said, you know what? I'm doing due diligence. I'm researching all the schools, checking boxes. And she said, at the end of this process, I'm probably going to end up at a good school, and I'm going to college, and it probably will be a good fit if I've done my research correctly. So she said, honestly, I'm just having fun with this, and I'm treating it as a process of self-discovery. And she said, I'm learning a ton about myself as I'm going through this process. And I wanted to bottle it up. I was like, gosh, that sentiment, I think everybody could benefit from, and because it can be overwhelming when you start to kind of think about just everything involved in this. But she said, mentally, I just made that switch. I'm going to have fun, so.
No, I love that. I had we do student interviews, not that often. We mostly interview admission professionals and people in college world, but every now and then we have a student. I interviewed a student from Wisconsin who was a runner, track runner. She ended up being a D3 recruit for Occidental, but her biggest lesson she learned was the self-discovery process, how much she learned about herself going through this college admission process and how valuable it was. And so I had that thought when you said that, Justin.
Yeah.
And so it sounds like I'm hearing you say, enjoy the ride, don't sweat the small stuff, learn about yourself. It's all going to work out in the end. It sounds
right.
like. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Walking this campus this morning, Mark, we have a tremendous physical plan. Across all my time here, we've had fantastic faculty, and those two things have been very consistent. But our biggest asset are our students, by a country mile. The type of students, and not just student athletes, but students that I've had a chance to interact with throughout these decades, that's our strength. The student athletes the students and the student athletes that we attract really are the lifeblood of the place. That's why we're all
the bar high.
Yeah. And it has been consistently.
And that's really important. I like to tell students there's 168 hours in the week. You're in class a very small number, 15 maybe, of that 168. Right. So who you are around is really a huge component of your education.
Mm-hmm.
No question.
But I think you're also probably being humble and modest because the length of time your faculty, a lot of them have been there. Sure. Some of the students may say the greatest strength is the professors and the adults in the community. So it's probably both of them that come together that make the special community you have. So we tell people in essay writing, show it, don't tell it. And I think just the longevity you both have and all the people you referenced, I think a lot of our listeners are getting a sense that you're an absolutely fine institution that a number of them probably need to add to their visit list as they whether they're an athlete or not, as they look at their travel plans. But let's close by having you share Trinity's website, and any other really good sources of information. Some people are like, oh, we've got great Instagram, or you should see our YouTube page, or we've got this admissions blog, anything else you want to share that for a family that wants to do a little bit more digging.
Yeah, and I would say all of those platforms, for us. So website is trinity.edu.
Oh, you got a good one. How many people wanted that? How many people wanted that?
We jumped on that quick, I think. From
I guess so.
And then for athletics, it's trinitytigers.com.
Nice.
It's the athletics page. At least for us, for Instagram, Trinity U or Trinity U Admissions are the ones that really we've been promoting. Twitter at Trinity U Tigers.
That's for our athletic
That's for
department.
athletics. Okay.
But once you get into the athletic department, each sport has its own Instagram and Twitter account.
Okay. Awesome. That'd be a really good place for an athlete to go find out more about that program, is the Instagram for that sport, or the Twitter for that
Instagram
sport.
And Twitter would give a good, give a good feel for it.
And with the number of years that Paul and I have been here, I think we would prefer a letter. So one Trinity Place, San Antonio 78212, handwritten letter.
Yeah, they have to go to the post office and buy a stamp.
Old school.
Exactly.
Old school. Listen, you guys have been absolutely fantastic and a true delight for me to chat with today. And I can't wait for our listeners to hear this. So thanks so much for the generosity with your time.
Absolutely.
You, Mark.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks for hosting us.
Oh, my pleasure.
And now it's time for our college spotlight of the week.
Friends, the last 2 weeks we've had part 1 and part 2. This will be part 3, which will be the final part. Listen and enjoy. One thing I've learned a lot from working with you, Kevin, is just the AP scores carry so much more weight in the assessment. It would seem to make sense if you're a parent of a younger student and you're listening, say you've got a 9th grader or 10th grader even, or maybe you're mostly listening for your 11th grader, but you have kids in 7th and 5th. If you're thinking of this international option, I would think it would make sense to maybe, if you have the ability, to make an investment in an AP tutor so that you can really bolster those scores. I know I personally, I'm going to talk a lot more about this on some other episodes, but as soon as U.S. schools went more test optional, it's inevitable that AP scores are going to carry more weight, because I know schools like to have common benchmarks and metrics that are nationally normed. There's just a comfort level with that, regardless of the fact that they may not feel that they can say that, because it'll be like, see, I knew you weren't test optional. So they might feel handicapped and they can't say it. But I was just having a conversation with a highly selective school at NACAC about test optional, and a very experienced admissions person said that test optional is fine, and especially if we're seeing 4s and 5s in those files, and so I know on my end, I'm doing more of this type of counseling to people. I'm saying, look, let's get some good AP scores in. I don't want to overly stress you out, but I know these test scores, these SAT and ACT numbers are getting crazy if only 40% of people are submitting. It's skewing these numbers really high. Depending on if someone's a good test taker or not, they may not even go down that path of even prepping. But sometimes it's easier actually to prep for the AP because it's so content centric. So I'm assuming you would think that would be good advice, but correct me if I'm wrong.
I think it's great advice. There is the caveat that the Scottish universities, in particular St. Andrews, care a little bit less about APs and are more likely to look at a student's transcript, which is shocking on a lot of different levels. And I think
sounds very American.
Yeah, I think that there's this continuum almost, or this this line of that certain places, LSE, Imperial, Oxbridge, they care so much about the APs, and once you get to certain Scottish universities like St. Andrews, and especially once you cross the Irish Sea into Trinity, if you've got a solid GPA, that can carry the day. So,
well, that's nice. I'm glad there's a little bit of variety.
Yeah, I think also something that not to snowball, or to not snowball, but just to pitch out another potential topic. But at some point, Mark, it might be worth us having a discussion about A levels,
that would be great.
I think that it's it is another standardized test, but I've been working with some of my students on it, and essentially, if you have hesitation about taking something like the AP because of the multiple choice section, for most A levels, it's free response. So it's a great alternative in a number of U.S. universities. I don't want to overstep my bounds here, but a number of U.S. universities, according to the A levels websites, do accept A levels as a form of proving that you've satisfied sort of preliminary credit like the AP or IB exams. So I think that we should definitely talk about them at some point, but today may not be that day.
No, not today, but I'm really glad you sussed that out. So let's talk about pros and cons. What do you see as the pros and cons of the ancient Scottish schools?
So I think that the biggest pro is the fact that they give you the opportunity to have a bit more varied education. If you study history at the University of Manchester, you're studying history. You may take a module in political science, or you may take a language or a literature class along the way, but 85 or 90% of what you're studying is history. Now, if you study history at an American university, you're studying. I just got back from my university's homecoming, so I'm still all wound up in William and Mary Pride right now. But I know that there's a limit at some universities of how many hours you can spend on your major. In the Irish system, it's a bit more nuanced. You're spending the last 2 years almost exclusively on your field. again, you might take a module in a language or something supplementary. But your first 2 years, you're just doing prereqs like you would here in the US, and you're studying things that may interest you. So there are some exceptions. If you're going to study architecture, they really would prefer you study architecture your first 2 years, because for some odd reason, they want people who design buildings that people are going to live and work in to have a firm foundation, no pun intended, in what they're
Just
going to be
got that.
doing. So I think that's the biggest pro. And some universities do let you have some flexibility. If you get in there and you decide, I think Edinburgh is great at this, for example. If you go and you want to study biochemistry, they know that not a lot of 17 and 18-year-olds really know what biochemistry is. They've got an idea of it, but they've not studied it to anything close to a degree level. So they put you in a biomedical sciences field for your first year or two. So you can switch between biochemistry and genetics and biology and human anatomy. And you can study a number of different things and figure out where exactly in the sciences you want to land. I think that's another big pro of it. As for the cons, it takes 4 years. There are some programs in the sciences, especially, that do have second year entry. So it does just take 3 years, but typically it takes 4 years, and that means an extra cost.
But don't you find Americans are conditioned to that anyway? Like, isn't that, or is that, then again, maybe one of the reasons they're seeking you out is the 3 year. So
I think it's a mix of
compared
both.
to that. Yeah.
I've worked with students whose families are more comfortable with the idea of spending 4 years in university, because let's face it, it's a great experience, and
you only get this one time if you can afford it. If it's no money issue. Yeah.
Yeah. But on the other hand, some families just clam up when, you possibly have to spend a 33% extra for what, despite the branding, is still the same degree, which, Mark, I've been chomping at the bit for this. And it's something that a lot of families are going to, I get a phone call or an email every few weeks about this, asking, well, where are the bachelor's degrees in Scotland? And it's because the Scottish universities award for non-science subjects. Those 4 or 5 universities award Master of Arts degrees. And this goes way back to the Middle Ages. And Mark, as you know, in a former life, I was a medieval history teacher. Where
it's a former life, but I can't have a conversation with you without you going back to that life. So either very fond memories, or it's just you still didn't get it all out of your system.
I mean, the Amazon package is arriving today has some really good books in it.
I'm sure it does.
But you would receive, after 7 years of studying in medieval university, a magister or magister, depending on how you want to pronounce your Latin, that gave you a license to teach. It was essentially a master's degree. Oxford and Cambridge undergraduate degrees convert after 7 years or so to being called this, according to their universities. The Scottish universities just go ahead and grant one, because their feeling is that the level of teaching certainly hasn't broken, and they've been teaching to the same standard. Now, granted, they weren't teaching biomedical sciences 500 years ago, or at least biomedical sciences without leeches and humors involved, but they still feel that there's no reason to break with that tradition. So whenever you see a Scottish university, one of those 4 or 5, and again, I keep saying 4 or 5 because Dundee can't, the others can't decide whether Dundee is allowed in the club or not. But St. Andrews,
sounding very elitist.
Yeah, St. Andrews, Edinburgh, Aberdeen, or Glasgow, the Master of Arts degree is the undergrad degree. So if you're finding yourself on one of these websites looking for that, and especially if it's in the humanities or social sciences, that's the degree you're looking for. A traditional master's degree is a Master of Studies or a Master's of Science, or any other number of M's followed by some other random letter. But some places it's an MPhil, depending on how research focused you want it to be. But again, I just want to, because that's something that really tends to confuse people, is they're like, wait, do I get a master's degree? And it's not the same as if you were to go someplace and get an integrated master's degree in 4 years elsewhere in the UK. So I just want to make sure everyone's clear on that.
I felt like Kevin had one condition for this interview. I have to explain the master's thing.
Oh,
I just
it's
have to
such
do
a
it.
thing, though. It's such a thing that people, just get confused by.
Well, it's
And
understandable.
I think when I floated this, I think I said that as one of the first things. I'd literally earlier that day gotten off the phone with somebody who had questions about it. And I said, this is like the third phone call this month. I've got to call Mark.
Sure. No, I'm glad you did. I'm playing around with you. So I have a question, Kevin. It's my last question, and can answer this, and then can you wrap it up, or if you have any other thing to share, let me know. But all these schools, which are the most popular from your experience? Which ones do you get the most interest in, and why?
I would say 1 out of every 4 people who I work with want to know about St. Andrews. It's, and with good reason, it has been recently named the best university in the UK for student satisfaction. The programs are world leading, but there's a dose of reality with that. A lot of people feel that St. Andrews, they may have a rather idyllic image of it, and there are a number of reasons for this. First of all, St. Andrews has done more than any other UK university, in my opinion, of reaching out and really courting American students. They've been on the Common App for decades, I believe, at this point. I remember when I went through, I saw them on the Common App, and that was many moons ago. And I think also, the Prince of Wales and his wife met at St. Andrews. So there is something to be said about the romanticism of that. That said, St. Andrews is kind of isolated. So if you want to be on a Scottish moor surrounded by golf courses and the North Sea and studying something you care about, it is heavenly. If a big part of being in university is access to a major city, then you're looking at an 1.5-hour train ride. And what I will say, though, is while many students come with an interest in St. Andrews, more students end up applying to Edinburgh. It definitely, for lack of a better term, it has a lot of the same Harry Potter vibe, as a student recently described it to me.
That's a good way to describe it.
And it's in a major city with a lot of history that it's not overwhelming like London or Amsterdam would be, but it's got easy access to the rest of Europe. And they're, by some counts, the 20th best university in the world, and they're very accessible for American students. We try not to get caught up in rankings, but...
Yeah, I'm always going to push back on that. That's going to be beauty's in the eye of the beholder.
But for a lot of students...
But what I will always say is this is what I always say. Highly ranked schools are very good. It doesn't mean they're good for you.
Exactly. And, there's... I would say of the other Scottish universities, the sleeper, really, that I'm surprised to not see more students interested in is Glasgow, because they've taken I don't want to call it a completely test optional approach, but they're definitely more flexible. And I feel Glasgow gets kind of pushed to the side in favor of Edinburgh, but it has an awful lot to offer. It's a much bigger city. It's obviously not the capital of Scotland, but it is quite a bit bigger and still has a lot of those same advantages. And, it's got a number of great programs that, for example, Glasgow and Edinburgh are both very well known for their law schools, but Edinburgh only teaches Scots law, whereas Glasgow teaches both Scots law and common law. So it's the same basis of law used in the rest of the UK and in the US and Canada and elsewhere. So it's got some advantages if anyone ever wanted to come back to the US and practice law, whereas Scots law would be, well, that's cool. But you're starting from, scratch, essentially.
Kevin, this has been great. It really has. And I really like these schools because they are ones that, you're the international guy, but these are schools that I do get a lot of questions about when people bring up international. St. Andrews by far the most, but Edinburgh, Glasgow as well as Aberdeen. The fifth one that you said is may or may not be on the club. I don't hear about that one as much.
Well, I think Dundee's coming into its own, and it's...
See, I said that one. I didn't remember the name. That's how nondescript it was. It was that one for me.
It is, it is the one that can't make up its mind or not. But we'll
There's always a stepchild out there.
Yeah. Well, actually, for years it was, I believe, I could be mistaken on this, it was part of St. Andrews, which has kind of led to, should it be in, should it not be in?
Sure. And I'm joking. I mean, for all I know, it's absolutely should be someone's first choice of the group,
Right.
I haven't visited and I don't know much about it. I'm joking around with you, but I think this was great. I think you picked a great list of schools, and you let me know what you want our next topic to be, whether we want to come back and do O levels, A levels, whatever you want to talk about. But I just know that I increasingly get more questions about international schools, much, much more so than I used to. And so I know there's a tremendous need for that. And I'm out of my wheelhouse going there. And so we're grateful to have you on as our international guru. So see you again in a few months.
Always great to be here, Mark. I appreciate it.
Take care, my friend.
You too.
Friends, for Monday's episode, I'm going to continue to share some insights from the conferences I've gone to over the last 6 or 7 weeks. And then Arlene Cash is going to be up. Now, last week, I mistakenly said that on Monday you'll hear from Arlene Cash. And then afterward, I was like, oh, snap. I forgot. There's a third part to Dr. Martha Saunders. So this time you really will hear from Arlene Cash. And as I said in the preview last time, we never had an experienced admission officer on before that had been at more than 5 schools. I think I said she worked at 9 or 10, but I actually went back and counted, and it's 11. Can you believe it? 11 schools. So you're going to see what a 5-decade career in admissions is like as I do part 1 of 3 in my interview with Arlene Cash. I'm always talking about the college admissions process, and you guys know I'm always challenging the thought that it's not where you go, but it's what you do when you get there. And I repeat that and repeat it over and over and over again because I really, truly believe in it. And I'm always concerned about the fact that if people put too much emphasis on the school you go to, they're expecting miracles to happen, the Red Sea to part. And they're going to be disillusioned one day because they're going to wake up and they realize, why am I working for my boss and my boss went to generic U with its 80% admit rate? How did that happen? And so I want to leave you with a quote. And I'm not the biggest Zig Ziglar fan, but he's got some good quotes. Last week I shared this quote with you. It's on the bottom of my emails. I said, your attitude, not your aptitude, will determine your altitude. Well, that came from Zig Ziglar. And we're going to close with another Zig Ziglar quote today. And here it is. There is no elevator to success. You have to take the stairs. Did you catch that? There is no elevator to success. You have to take the stairs. See you Monday, everybody. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 14. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel. And to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blacks. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joy Stucker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stalianos Dimitriou. If you want to have a coaching session with Lisa or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcast. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Thursday.